Morning, everyone. Welcome back to Fresh Start, broadcasting from our studios here at News Talk 93 FM. Morning to our listeners, www.newstalk93fm.com. That's all? We get it right? All right. Okay. All right, we're moving to our morning papers this morning. We start with the Observer. Just to give what's on the front page. Is BMW really the ultimate driving machine? And in the all-woman feature, Sex with the Boss, pure hell? Interesting. Church ready to pay taxes. Weekly offering off the table, says church head. And a great run. We see the Sagicor Sigma corporate run yesterday, which had an estimated 16 million coming venture. In. Yes, it is. It is. It will be good now to see how these funds are expended, if we can get the stories of the impact, so people can feel that their run was worth it. They had 20,000 participants running, walking, or in wheelchairs too. And we see, for example, that there was Alfred Francis in the picture here, Asafa Powell, my girl Merlin Otti, Richard Biles and Donovan Perkins from Sagicor itself. But let's take the main story. Church ready to pay taxes. The Jamaican church said yesterday it would have no problem paying property taxes if the government asked it to pay up, as part of measures preparatory to an International Monetary Fund pact. Whatever tax the government feels that is reasonable for us to pay, we'll pay it, said Reverend Renard White, chairman of the powerful umbrella group of churches, JUGC, which represents a large majority of Jamaican Christians. In an interview with the Jamaica Observer, White said, "We should pay our fair share like everybody else, and if the government decides to ask us to pay taxes on property that church buildings are on, then so be it. Currently, respective churches pay tax on all other..." You can pick up there.
The story continues on page 4. Yesterday, White was unable to give specific figures, but said that the church's real estate holding is substantial, especially those of the Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, and Seventh-day Adventist denominations. White's comments followed a press release in which the Jamaica Umbrella Group of Churches called on the Portia Simpson Miller-led administration to implement other cost-saving measures such as reducing the size of the cabinet, slashing salaries of MPs, as well as reducing the number of advisors to the government.
And these are matters that we had discussed here on the program, and we see, well, it just goes on to make comments about the other usual thing, what's happening with IMF. In the rest of the papers?
Front page of the Gleaner this morning, rum punched. Reduction in waivers set to impact spirits and other industries. Plans by the government to slash millions of dollars in discretionary tax waivers once afforded to the manufacturing sector could see the rum industry being hardest hit, according to President of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, Brian Pengele, while pointing out that this was not the only area of the sector that runs the risk of being shut down under the government's soon-to-be-implemented policy on waivers and incentives. Pengele said the rum industry was heavily dependent on molasses, with more than 60,000 tons imported annually.
Well, let's go back to the Observer. Let's finish up with Observer and then we'll flip back to Gleaner. On the inner pages here, Majesty Gardens on page 3. Majesty Gardens and JPS swap blame over streetlights. Residents in Majesty Gardens last week threatened to stage a protest over what they claimed as a failure of the Jamaica Public Service to install streetlights in their community. The residents said they were angry because for several months they had been calling on the Light and Power Company to address the problem regarding lack of streetlights, but they believe their calls are falling on deaf ears. Right now we're living in fear. At night, the streets in the community are pitch black because of the absence of street lights, and people are afraid to travel in the community, said Marcia Smith, a resident of Majesty Gardens. The woman was joined by several other residents who said they did not have a problem with the recent operation that JPS carried out in air to remove illegal connections, but insisted the installation of streetlight was important. The other day, the JPS workmen come and remove the illegal wires from the air, but the least they can do, well, that's their reported speech, is to put up some streetlights in the air, resident Anthony Fox said.
Another story here from the Observer. Indicom sends Immaculate Conception students file to DPP. The Independent Commission of Investigation, Indicom, last week completed its probe into the death of 16-year-old Vanessa Kirkland, the Immaculate Conception high school student allegedly shot by the police in Norman Lane, Kingston last March. Indicom's senior public relations officer, Camille Reed, yesterday told the Jamaica Observer that Kirkland's file was submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Well, just to close off on that story, Indicom's investigation was aimed at determining whether or not Kirkland's right to life was breached, whether any policies of the Jamaica Constabulary Force was breached, and to determine whether or not any of the concerned officers are culpable for Kirkland's death or for the injury of the other 6 persons. This is 1 year later. I wonder how much longer they do before the family gets justice. A sense of justice.
Justice delayed is
justice denied.
Another story here on crime. 5 cops ordered reinstated in lotto scam case. 5 police officers from the Mount Salem police station who were in 2009 retired in the public interest over allegations that they were involved in the lottery scam have been ordered reinstated by the Supreme Court. The men, Inspector Melvin Dennis, Sergeant Anthony Cunningham, and Constable Garfield Blackella, Sean Baker, and Roy Ford Lee, were ordered reinstated with full salary and benefits by Justice Kirk Anderson, who ruled 2 Fridays ago that their case be remitted to the Police Service Commissions for rehearing.
And the PSC had ruled that the men be retired following hearings that were set in train by allegations from Courtney Grayson, who had been arrested in Montego for impersonating the police. But I'd hope that maybe we'd have gotten a follow-up on this story, because as it said 2 weeks ago, once it broke, we had it. But this is just really a repeat of the same story. There's not much more in there.
Observe what's going on.
Oh boy. To flip back to the other page, page 4, government seeks retroactive protection for bauxite levy breach. Government is to offer mea culpa to Parliament before seeking support for a bill to validate its actions pertaining to the misuse of funds accumulated under the Bauxite Production Levy Act since 1999.
Whoa.
A bill to this effect, titled the Bauxite Production Levy, they just realized their mistake, aren't they? Was tabled last week by Minister of Finance and Planning, Dr. Peter Phillips, who led the first and second reading in the House of Representatives last week, preparatory to the debate which could begin tomorrow. The bill has not generated much interest either in or out of Parliament. It is seen by those in the know as fundamental departure from the way successive governments has handled the Capital Development Fund, which is financed by payments from the 38-year-old bauxite levy in the past. It is also seen as another effect, which is where I was going, of the IMF. In my head, that's exactly where it was jumping to, of the IMF insistence on a program of improved fiscal responsibility compatible with the medium-term economic objectives. In other words, it needs to be a clear report and transparency about where the money is going. We see also beside that PSOJ warns of massive job losses.
The Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, is calling on the government to immediately review and make changes to aspects of its new tax regime, which is said could do more harm than good to the economy. The PSOJ is urging the government to immediately review and change its tax treatment of certain raw material inputs under the new waiver caps imposed by the proposed IMF agreement, said the group in a release on the weekend. Unless modified, this proposed tax treatment will likely force a shutdown of critical Jamaican industries and cause thousands of Jamaican workers to lose their jobs, said the release.
Going on to pages 6 and 7, we see President Michel Martelly of Haiti will be chairing the CARICOM meeting. Well, beginning today, the crime transport was on the agenda for CARICOM Haiti meeting. The crime menace affecting the Caribbean, as well as the recurring air transportation woes, are scheduled for a special focus at the 2-day 24 intersessional meeting of the Caribbean Community CARICOM Heads of Government that gets underway today, in Haiti. Participating in a special session on crime and security with the CARICOM leaders and their relevant cabinet colleagues will be Attorney General of the United States of America, Eric Holder. At least one-third of the heads of government of the 15-member community will be absent, among them the Prime Ministers of Grenada, Tillman Thomas, and Barbados, Frundell Stewart, who will be leading their team of candidates for the parliamentary elections within 2 days of each other. Sweet Grenada tomorrow and Barbados on Thursday. Among the other no-shows to be represented at foreign minister level are Jamaica's Prime Minister Portia Simpson-Wheeler, currently preoccupied with closing arrangements for the agreement finally reached with the International Monetary Fund, and discussion on regional transportation challenges will have a special emphasis on concerns being expressed by a few governments. Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent has already disclosed his anxiety to share with Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bisesa a legal opinion he sought and obtained that suggests that Trinidad and Tobago fuel subsidy to state-owned Caribbean Limited violates CARICOM's revised treaty. That's an interesting by meeting.
Well, from the story, you see, it's indicating that quite a few heads of government will not be at the CARICOM meeting, and this to me is a signal of how unimportant we think CARICOM is and how we continue to treat the regional body and regional cooperation as a whole.
Or is it because it's in Haiti? Is that what it is? What makes you wonder, eh?
Well, let's go back to the Gleaner. Story on the Gleaner here. NHT chair going down wrong road. Attorney claims drawdown from the fund is illegal. Attorney at law Hugh Wildman is contending that the government's move to draw down $45 billion from the National Housing Trust over the next 4 years to support its fiscal incentives is unconstitutional. The attorney argues that the funds are the property of the depositors under the NHT Act, and so the government cannot pass a law, whether primary or subsidiary legislation, to take funds from NHT contributors. NHT Chairman Easton Douglas has argued that the Public Bodies and Management Accountability Act gives the Minister of Finance authority to require the NHT to make financial contributions in support of the government's fiscal incentives.
It says the trust is a statutory body and as a consequence falls within the definition of a public body under the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act under Section 4(5) of the PBMAA. And in accordance with the Public Bodies Financial Distribution Regulations 2012, the Minister of Finance has the power to legally require the NHT to make a financial contribution in support of the government's fiscal initiatives. Douglas said in a media release late last week. The NHT chairman has also said that in making the commitment, the NHT is guided by the opinion of the Solicitor General. You know, Andre, I recall when I think it was 2003, 2004, when we were looking at an expanded education policy. And there was a rigorous debate in the House about where the funds were to come from. And there was great resistance about using those funds from NHT to support the educational sector. And in fact, there was a timeline set for it to say, look, if we do this, you can do it for 3 to 4 years, if I recall correctly. And then, because there was a resistance to say, look, these monies are slated to deal with social housing and to give people opportunity to build out their own spaces as how they desire. So do not compromise that. So while we see that this is here as a means that we can use to support the government's initiatives because of our IMF negotiations. What is it? The context has changed?
Well, we've seen this in the US actually with their social security system, where quite a few funds are used to support government initiatives, and now there's this big problem with the social security system in the US because
there's been
really
too much pulling from it.
Too much pulling from it, and down the future, people who are retiring, young people are going to be retiring, have no funds to draw down on.
Right.
So, I mean, it really is an issue that we have to look at, because the fact is that if a government agency has the spare capacity and can support government initiatives,
well, you see,
then it
what
should.
do you mean on spare? Don't you build up the surplus so that you have it as a buffer in case there is a call from the institution itself, not necessarily from government per se, no?
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a
This one we have to
dilemma.
keep.
It's
Yes,
a
it is.
dilemma because, I mean, where's the money going to come from?
Okay, that's point. Pick that story there at the top. Interesting one.
Another story here. I more than government paper. Bonds alone won't grow economy, says insurance executive. Story here by Jodian Gilpin, and she writes, following the introduction of a second debt exchange program in 3 years, a major player in the insurance sector is urging the investment community not to over-rely on government paper. Donovan Brown, Chief Executive Officer at the Chancellor Insurance Company, made the calls yesterday after days before the National Debt Exchange offer closes on Thursday. I don't think investing in government paper alone actually grows an economy, Brown stated in an interview with the Gleaner. He added, by law, for pensioners and others, it is a safe investment, but in terms of growing your company, we have to find other avenues of income streams.
Well, it'd be good to have a discussion with Donovan on this further. I look forward to that. I know he's a thinking man. He's taken his small company as grown by leaps and bounds, so he should understand.
We need more of that in this country.
Certainly. Senator urges more protection for workers, decrying the continued absence of Occupational Safety and Health Act, which is true. It's been on and off the agenda for a long time. Opposition Senator Cavan Gale has urged Labour Minister Derek Kelly to quickly take such legislation to Parliament to help protect the rights of workers. Gale, who opened the debate on a motion in the Senate on Friday, noted that the legal framework dealing with occupational safety and health at the workplace was outdated. Jamaica really needs an Occupational Safety and Health Act, urgently to take into consideration all the factors which have developed since then in terms of the well-being of workers who work in dangerous circumstances, Gale said. But this matter came up in Parliament some time ago. It came up, there was a draft report, that there were initial committee sittings on this. Why haven't we been able to pass this legislation,
We'll speak with Roger Chang this morning, and he's head of the unit that was spearheading this at the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. So let's try and get some answers.
Yeah, it'd be good to get some answers from him on that one.
Another story here from the Senate. Revise laws to protect our women and children. Senator says new committee must be set up to review degrees of punishment. That's page A4.
Oh, that's Kamina's motion.
So,
right.
Story reads, pointing to the need for greater legislative protection for women and children, Opposition Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith has called for the establishment of a joint select committee to suggest amendments to existing legislation. Johnson-Smith said the committee should consider amendments to the Offences Against the Person Act, the Sexual Offences Act, and the Child Care and Protection Act, and arrive at appropriate punishments for crimes such as the murder of women and children, sexual offences against children, and the abduction of children.
Right, this is going to take quite a bit of work for this committee. Senator Johnson-Smith, in leading this motion, is certainly, well, she's legal counsel too. She certainly would need to be doing quite a bit of work to look at the relevant clauses of those pieces of legislation. And to just close out here, page A8, a question of sovereignty. Government and IMF bypass of tax committee troubling. This is a report from the Gavel, who follows what's taking place in Gordon House, both in the upper and lower house. It appears that we have traded our sovereignty for a deal with the International Monetary Fund. If Dr. Peter Phillips, the finance minister, is to be believed, the IMF basically told him to ignore Parliament and put revenue measures on the table, or else there would be no deal. This is the same Phillips who had huffed and puffed about the manner in which tax packages were read out almost by edict by his predecessor, Audley Shaw. He and the People's National Party, which forms the government, promised and delivered on a commitment to ensure that the entire Parliament has a say in what taxes should be raised. Last year, standing orders of the House of Representatives were amended to ensure the tax committee is permanently revised. Well, we're going to do some commentary on this in terms of, as I see it, we'll take the balance of the story then. That closes out we'll give you a little snippets of what was in the papers there this morning. And if you've been listening, it's Sharon Hay-Webster here on Fresh Start.
And Andre Poyser sitting in for Clyde Williams.
Explore them. What's on your mind with that this morning, Andre?
This morning, Sharon, resting on my mind is this issue of the NHT and the fact that the government has consistently turned to the NHT as a sort of support base to support its fiscal initiatives.
I mean, one
But
window, not base.
right,
One
well,
window,
one
right.
window. But what really has dawned on me is the fact that the NHT has become such a model institution that the government has sought it fit to continually go back to the NHT to solicit funds. So clearly the NHT is doing something
It's working. It
that
has a structure that works.
right that other public entities aren't doing, and I'm suggesting that we take that model of the NHG that works and apply it to other public bodies, because this here is a public entity that generates its own revenues, sustainable revenues at that, and it is set up in such an accountable way that the government can turn to the NHT in times of crisis such as these. And this is how our public entities should function, with efficiency and in such a way as to support the government initiatives. Whether or not the government's drawing down the funds from the entity is legal, it's
That's a
not my
separate
call.
issue.
It's
Okay.
right, because I don't have the legal know-how. But clearly the NHT is doing something right, and we ought to applaud them for the work they've been doing, and just try to go in and try to understand what is working for the NHT and how that can be applied to other public entities.
Well, for one, because the funds yes, other funds have dedicated purpose in terms of their pull down, yeah, such as your NIS, because NIS too also has had its pool of funds that has had some surplus for a while, and in fact those funds were reinvested, and then it became a problem because of how it was managed. So your point of the NHT management is quite applicable, because when you look at it, NHG has done so well. There must be something in respect of how it has been structured, in respect of
Certainly.
management,
Certainly.
and that no administration has really played around with that structure for any political gain, so to speak. Although we will see, if we go back in the 80s, there was some disagreement as to how the funds were used and so on. But we've seen since then that the funds dedicated for provision of housing choices, as through the NHT, have been well used and managed. Not just a matter of access, but the management of it.
And not only that, but in terms of customer service and just the general level of service, you get the sense that the NHT is one of those bodies that
Is accessible.
It's accessible. You know about the NHT, you know about what they offer, and when you go, you feel as though you are a customer and you are treated as a customer. It's not like other public entities where you go
And
and
people just have attitude, just to put it
exactly,
that way.
exactly.
Like, what are you really here for? Well, I know I'm supposed to get paid to serve you, but what are you there for? It's
Exactly.
true. It's a whole difference in attitude, and I guess it makes a difference as to the spirit within which it was put in place,
Certainly.
and how it has been continued to be managed since then.
Certainly.
Which other agencies you would think of, just off the top of your head, that you
Well,
would love to see that model attached to them?
I had thought of the agency led by Wholeness, that used to be led by Patricia Wholeness.
Oh, RGD?
The RGD, right. RGD has also another model agency that has been doing some wonderful work, and I recall that a group from the Caribbean, a group of registrars from other small island territories, came to visit to actually look at the model that we have here, so that they could take those lessons back home and apply it to their system. So I mean, we have these things working for us. Let's try to
Apply them
replicate
to other
them. Let's try
yeah.
to apply them and try to get some reform right throughout
And
the system.
use the expertise that have been a part of them to be able to pass
Certainly.
those skills on. In other words, like a mentor. I recall in Spanish Town, because this a part of, right on the cusp of Rivoli there where RGD was before. It used to be such a problem there in handling traffic in terms of pedestrians and people. I mean, vehicles, because there was always this rush and you had the totes and all of the liaison services, let's put it that way. I'm not saying that people don't exist who try it now still.
Right.
With the RGD, but the good thing about the RGD too, you know, that building, Andre, you wouldn't realize, or maybe others wouldn't recall, but that building came in before time and under budget by a contractor out of Spanish Town, H.D. Burton and Associates, I don't forget that, came in under time and under budget. And maybe it's just that spirit of how it has been established,
Right.
which has been carried forward. So remember that reading we did this morning from The Secret. Says, think, believe, achieve.
Well, another agency I had in mind too was the Passport Immigration Agency, PICA. The level of service you receive from PICA is quite phenomenal.
Big difference.
It's quite
big
phenomenal.
Difference from 10, 12 years ago.
Certainly.
We used to have this huge crowd that would gather outside. I'm not saying they're still not there now,
Right.
but they've had the chance to just refine the manner in which they provide the
Level of the
service.
efficiency is fantastic. I remember just 2 weeks ago, I was heading up on a trip to the United States, and one of the members of the team that we were heading up with, she didn't have her passport, and
Really?
she
Okay.
applied in that short space of time, and I was able to receive her passport.
She applied online, or she went in and made
She applied online,
Okay.
and in that process she was able to receive her passport in such a short space of time, and I was just amazed at the efficiency
That's
of the
good.
agency. And I mean, these are the positive things that we need to be replicating, because good things are happening in Jamaica.
Well, you know, especially when we keep speaking about the challenge of the IMF and all the things we need to do and looking outside, there are models inside that work. So
Certainly.
let's celebrate those and look at that. I'm going to pick up another 2 sets of stories if we have the time. In the Observer, the editorial, the social agenda and hard truths. It hasn't attracted media attention it deserved. However, an important element of the release issued by Mr. John Keys Martin, head of the International Monetary Fund mission to Jamaica, focused on the need to protect the poorest and most vulnerable. And the story goes on, however, that notwithstanding that, it cannot be that those who must be protected, be they through the church, and as the editorial points out, Mr. Robert Herrera of the Seventh-day Adventist Church urged church members to pay their taxes. And we see Reverend Renard White says, well, us churches will contribute to helping to push our nation out of this space, this negative space we find ourselves in. But as it says, it cannot be that with this social agenda to protect, we keep this idea of the womb to tomb syndrome secure, so that everybody feels that government must take care of you every step of the way of life for whatever you do, and is always providing protection for those who can't do. Not saying government mustn't provide protection, Andre, but there must be a limit. People must understand that you have some responsibility for how you live, where you live, and what you do to live.
Well, you see, for me, this is really a sort of cultural issue, and I think
It
it's going to take a
Leadership.
bit more than telling people that
No.
they can't depend on the government, because if you've already built in a system of dependence,
This is the point. Thank you for making that.
you know,
Right.
telling people that, look, you can't be dependent anymore because things are, there has to be that sort
Well,
of
this is why out
culture.
of the PATH program, you know, there's the initiative to carry you to a point and then to try to wean you off of it so that you don't stay on that program for life, so to speak. It is true that there are many families who are in very challenging circumstances. We won't take that away. But we have to begin looking at that in some very fundamental ways of behavior change, community change. Some of what the varying administrations have done in terms of changing how communities evolve, dealing with the issue of squatting. But as we had seen from conversation with Dr. Chang and with who was it we had on the program another time, I'm not recalling who it was, but in any case, 3/4 of Jamaica, so to speak, is on squatted areas. informal communities. So
well, here,
if you are informal, just to finish this point though, Andre, if you're informal in nature and you're not pay, you throw up arm line, you breach water line, you not pay no property tax. You understand? You cut and carve your way and you just hold on like a barnacle. You're not part of the system then, eh?
here's an idea. We're speaking about the size of the cabinet, all of the advisors, and the fact that we should make government more lean and efficient. So here's an idea. Cut some of those ministries, cut some of the cabinet members, cut some of those advisors. What I would want to see is a minister with responsibility for poverty reduction. Because
Okay.
I don't think we have addressed the issue of poverty in this country. And until we do that, because the only way to really bring people up and to bring the economy up is to get that mentality of poverty, because poverty is really a cycle and the cycle is just continuing. So I mean, I would like to see a minister of poverty reduction, and I think the perfect person for this is the Prime Minister herself, because she understands what poverty is like.
In that case, then we would have seen a change in her constituency then, sir. And I say that with the greatest of respect. I
Well,
hear silence.
well,
Moving along. A question of sovereignty. I won't say that there hasn't been work done in there, but she is the longest serving member of parliament in the House of Representatives now, having been there from 1976 onward. And the constituency has shifted more into poverty than grown out of poverty.
but you see, I wouldn't really pin it down to one constituency,
No,
you see,
but just
because
no.
it's a
I
wide
understand you.
sweeping issue.
I hear you, but if you're going to take a lead on that, then you must be able to lead by example.
That is true.
A question of sovereignty, picking up back what the gavel had approached in the, although we don't have a lot of time, just have about a minute for it. But as the gavel points out, the National Sacrifice Campaign may not succeed unless the Prime Minister leads by example. She must immediately cut her oversized, ineffective executive and encourage all members of Parliament to take a pay cut. After all, they are not shabbily paid. We wonder if Simpsonville and her team have not been resisting a pay cut because they don't want it to impact on their pension benefits when they leave politics. I hadn't even thought of that. And here to share with us this morning is Reverend Canon Early Gordon, retired rector of St. Mary's, the Virgin Anglican Church, right on the corner of Washington Boulevard and Malines Road there. Used to be the church with the red gates, not so, Canon Gordon?
Oh, yes.
Morning, Father Gordon, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
All right, I came across just reading through things in terms of the role of the church and how people deal with hard times in the church. I came across a Sunday school lesson, Father, I wonder if I would just put here, just as a background. James 1:1-4, reading from the King James Version, says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting, said, My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect, entire, and wanting nothing.
That is James is that saint has the type of understanding.
Yes.
But if you look at Acts of the Apostles, chapters 2 and 3,
Yes.
and also Genesis chapter 1, 2 and 3, the Bible is written in a way that the Old Testament was telling us that we have the potential to manage our properties. And also, in Colossians, it says the same thing, that we are here on earth to make certain that the wealth of the society, the wealth of the land, is done in such a way that it helps all human beings.
Well, good morning, Reverend Gordon. Andre Poyser here, sitting in for Clyde Williams. As you speak about the wealth, the fact that the Bible speaks of the fact that the wealth of the land should be managed, just want to get an idea from you of how would you assess the economic power of the church, because traditionally the church has not been thought of as an economic force, and we haven't really seen the church in that light as a body that manages and distributes wealth. So
Okay, fine. Now, King's House land was owned by the Anglican Church.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, no. So that has been sold.
Right.
Now, we have 110 primary schools, the largest in the country, and we have 11 high schools, which is the most. But no property now. We have a property manager, Mr. Aston Gordon, and the Reverend Denzel Barnes is our diocesan secretary. He has now the evidence of what you asked me. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. At Grange Hill, we have 14 acres for just one church only.
Yes.
Nothing is on it. And in Old Harbor, we have a piece of land for 37 acres. St. Elizabeth, Westmoreland, St. Catherine. We have about 200 acres there. And Montpellier St. James has a place for 13 acres. We have about 100 plus churches or more. The last time I heard, we had about 850,000 acres of land.
This is for what? The Anglican Church. Okay, this is the Anglican Church you're speaking of, Father Gordon.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
well,
Which means that we have enough land, and when we use it properly, we can pay our bills, we can build more churches. But we have to reach the stage where we are beginning to, as a church, to look at the viability of these lands. We have them, They are there, especially St. Elizabeth. Why do you think St. Elizabeth is producing all the food to eat? Because they have a lot of the land.
Okay.
I was born at Cambridge, right? And when we had food to eat, St. Elizabeth was the parish that had all the food. And the same way is with Westmoreland and St. Catherine. This country, my dear brother and sister, has enough land that every Jamaican can benefit from.
In that case, then, what you are saying, then, Canon Gordon, is that the church needs to organize itself, then,
Yes.
to
Yes.
utilize these lands and use the. Are you thinking then that they must be just the members of the Anglican Church that must have access to these lands, or are you saying that the church should organize itself to use the land as a resource to encourage productive activity, which would feed the nation as well as earn income and have a working attitude?
I think the church has to be more creative. As you know, some of the older people don't want to sell land. And you have to know, be frank and straight, that where we are now as a nation and as a country, and the entire world is going through a process.
Yes.
We just can't leave it for Jamaica alone. Look at what is happening. Now, we now have to look at all our church is organized properly in deaneries. So it's not a problem now. We can look at the lands in the 4 deaneries and say, no, how are we going to manage these properties? Who's going to plant cane, grass? We, as a graduate of the Jamaica School of Agriculture, it is the Jamaican scientists that bred the best peppers in the world. We were the one who bred Pangola grass. It is Jamaicans did it.
Okay.
Not the British, not the Americans.
Okay.
We did it. We bred the best bull in the world. Jamaicans did it.
Yes.
So we have the potential, and we have the brain and the scientific thought. We now have to seriously look at what is in Jamaica and how we can magnify what we have. And the church has the potential, and the church has the scientific ability. We have the members there.
So what is stopping the church from being organized in that way, Canon?
The word organized that you use is important. We now have to look at, since we have in our church all the scientists, the agronomy, everything is there. We now have to organize people like that in a group. So now, let's look at our properties. What can we go effectively so that we can manage our schools, we can look at our primary schools, or basic schools, and we didn't mention basic schools as yet, right? We also have to look at the Jama classes that we have in the church, and look at how the church can use its properties in such a way that we can benefit the Jamal people who are coming to class and they don't have anything to eat. The houses in which the deliver breaking down. We now can see that the church has the potential and the wherewithal if the church is organized properly in terms of cash, using our properties in such a way that we can use this money for social movement and to benefit people who have land and they want help.
Reverend Gordon, if you will for a moment, just step back to your earlier comment about the massive holdings of lands and property that the church has. Story here in the paper this morning where there's some suggestion from Reverend Renard White, chairman of the Umbrella Group of Churches, that the church would be ready to pay taxes on these lands and properties. Do you share a similar view with Reverend White?
In that case, it is not a problem. What we normally do, Synod is coming up. What would happen that we would have a resolution to go to Synod, but we have to get to that resolution, as you suggested a while ago, to the pre-Synod meetings that will be held. That's what it is. So somebody writes a resolution with what he said a while ago, we discuss it at the pre-Synod, and then it goes to Synod for ratification and discussion.
But I'm not sure about what are the legal tenets that, has prevented the government from taxing the church. Would you have any idea about that whole setup? Why has the church not been paying taxes? And up to this point, there's no the suggestion for the churches to pay taxes. So I'm wondering what has
property taxes, you should say.
Property taxes. What has stopped lawmakers from taxing churches?
I think it may be a long historical phenomenon that has become part of the
practice.
Yes.
Part of the practice.
But I don't think they've ever discussed it, and I don't think it has ever come at all.
Okay. So you would see then that it is a responsible stance being taken by Reverend White, and based on what you are saying as to how the Anglican Church could pick it up, you are certainly supporting, it seems, that view that it's something that the church should consider and put as their contribution towards the solutions that we seek for our economic growth.
Yeah, the church now at this point in history, now is the time that the church should be on board with what's happening in the nation in terms of our health, also how we use the land, and how we pay taxes. I don't think this should be a problem, but the Anglican Church has a time to discuss it. So if we went to Synod, it has to go to, as I said, to pre-Synod first, and also 4 areas of the church would examine it before it goes to Synod.
But
so it's a good idea.
Rev, what about the argument that the church does not have that sort of social responsibility. The church is a spiritual organization. The church should stay out of the government's business. The church should stay out of the economy and attend to the spiritual calling that it has.
But the church, I don't see it that way. The church, which has a lot of lands, some of the lands are being used properly. But they need assistance. They need to look at what is happening to the other churches that are using their land. Because what has happened, brother and sister, many of our properties are being captured because it's not being developed.
Right.
This is what is happening all over the place. So what we have to do as a church, to begin to rethink now, what we could do is discuss the matter at the pre-synod and say, no, sisters and brothers, we are not paying taxes, but our country needs our help in this area. Could we look at the point if we have enough money put down? Do we have some money in the bank where we can use some of it to assist in this process? So what we could do is the church itself, Anglican Church, could look at itself and say, all right, we are going to discuss this matter.
Discussion on the role of the church in the economy, and joining us this morning is Reverend Ernly Gordon.
No, Canon Ernly Gordon.
Canon
Please
Ernly
give him his
Gordon.
proper title. Father Gordon will come back to you. I should tell listeners I know Father Gordon from my book. How old, Father? About 10 years old?
I'm 75 years old.
Okay, we won't say anything more. All right. Father Gordon, we want to shift the conversation a little deeper now. We've spoken about the land that the Anglican Church has, and we're just using the Anglican Church because we're having this conversation with you to just expand the principle.
Yeah.
But is there room not to have more involvement of the church in getting this economic recovery other than just the use of the land? And what am I speaking to? As you pointed out, the whole network of schools. And we have a problem with attitude to work, attitude to economic responsibility. Is this something that you believe the church has a role in influencing the kind of social change that we need at this time?
Yes, because the church has enough people who have PhDs and masters and bachelors in all our schools, and they are trained in the process that you're talking about. So the church doesn't have a problem in finding these people. They are there teaching. As a matter, some who are retired have gone back to do the same thing that they said a while ago, because they found out that the behavior in some of our schools are not up to date, right? And they have to begin to look at not only a theological process, but an idea that assists the young people who are attending schools, and some of the teachers too need to go back to college and university because they are not trained in psychology enough. And when they are to assist the young girls and young boys in high school, they do not have the intellectual energy in terms of psychology and psychotherapy, all these things.
So
Read the Jamaica School of Agriculture.
Are you
And we
saying?
understood that.
Are you saying, therefore, then, that the Anglican Church is considering this as an option to pick up through its network of schools?
It has to consider that in that way, because I've listened to some of them, and they're saying what you are saying.
Okay.
Because the behavior in some of the schools, some of it, they can't manage them. So they are now going the route that you were just saying a while ago. And the children are beginning to have a new idea of how to conduct themselves.
Father Gordon, your thoughts on whether or not the church should engage the IMF. We've heard last week that we're close to inking a deal with the IMF. What should the church's stance be? in regards to our negotiations with the IMF?
As a former graduate of the Jamaica School of Agriculture, we have enough land, you see, and enough intellectual energy. We should not have had to go to the IMF. I remember when we were going to the Jamaica School of Agriculture, we were managing agriculture. And we understood these things. So we should not have had to go to IMF for at all.
But Rev, I mean, we're in a serious situation here. The church has not really stepped up to the plate. Was there really an option?
I don't think many of our churches, and I'm talking just Anglican, I don't think many of our churches had a session where they could say, right, what is the church's concept of the IMF? How could we assist in this? I don't think any denomination has discussed this in depth. They might have come up with some ideas, but not in depth. So it now must be a part of our culture, and I agree with you now. The church must take this on. Look at the IMF. Look at how the church, not just benefits. How can the church assist in that process? Because there's a church everywhere.
That is true.
So the church can carry the message.
But you know, the bigger message for me though, Father Gordon, in listening and looking through the comments that we see online, is it that the church has lost its historical role in the evolution of our Jamaican society? When you look at the role that the church had in respect of the fight against slavery, granted, much of that leadership may have come from yes, the same Catholic and Anglican Church from Britain, but still, we had our local leaders that led that process too. But having attained emancipation and attained these free villages that the church was associated to some extent, it seems there's been a watered down involvement of the church in the national economy.
The point is this: when we began to look at the 70s, right? If you look at what happened to the church, the Baptists, the Methodists, the Anglicans, Roman Catholics, we were part of the new Caribbean movement. As a matter of fact, sister, we have a prayer book that is not Caribbean.
Yes,
and we have a
true.
hymn book that is Caribbean. We have Peter Tosh and all the people there in the hymn book now. So the church has changed theologically, right? But I don't think the church has looked at what we did in the 70s as a church in the Caribbean. The same thing that you're now saying. We have studies on them now. Locked up in our desk. The same thing you asked me. That was the church in the 70s in the Caribbean, not just Jamaica alone.
Okay,
Caribbean.
so it was.
We had these things.
With this movement in the Caribbean, and we see, maybe you haven't read the paper since morning, Father, but there's a story in the paper, for example, about the CARICOM heads of government meeting in Haiti just now. And many heads of state are absent, including our own. Understood, however, that it's because of the IMF factor. There are elections going on in Grenada and Barbados, yes, but it seems that there is not a push through CARICOM for leadership to coalesce around issues of significance for the development of the region. Is there any hope for that kind of discussion amongst the Caribbean church leaders for that kind of view?
It has to be that no, because we started that in the 70s, right? Every denomination. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church was on board too, because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, according to a Roman Catholic priest 50 years ago in a book, that Egypt was the maker of spirituality and the maker of orthodoxy, not Rome, Egypt.
Okay.
So the point is this: what we had in the 70s, which we're documenting, is exactly what you're saying now.
And
We looked at all these things in the Caribbean, not just as an Anglican church by itself. No, we didn't do that. We had a corporate understanding. And Ashley Smith wrote some fantastic books, which we shared. We had one about rare roots and potted plants, reflections on the Caribbean church. These things, my sister and brother, we have documented them already, and we have done them already. They're all here in the book. Christ, the hope of the Caribbean. It goes on to tell how we should look at the potted plants in the Caribbean. In other words, connecting agriculture with theology. One of the best books that we have ever seen written by a Jamaican.
what's the name of that again, Canon?
It's Rare Roots and Potted Plants, Reflections on the Caribbean Church, done by the Reverend Ashley
Oh,
Smith.
Ashley Smith, right.
Yes. This is the context we did. But we also had some of the things. The church and the liberation of the poor. The task, church, and social change. Renewal of the church in the Caribbean. Justice and development. Faith and economics. The church under socialist government. The Christian perspective on changing system. What the church did in the 70s was to connect justice and development.
Yes,
Well,
but
all these things are written.
But Reverend Gordon, that
Yes.
was the 70s. And
Yes.
we've seen significant change in the society. And the thought now is that the church has really lost its relevance. We've seen in the census where quite a few young people, majority of young people don't go to church. The church doesn't have that appeal, and the church is no longer seen as out there fighting the social causes.
Well, you have a position. This is why they used to curse me sometimes in the 70s and even now. Every time they see me, you know. The point is this, and I agree with you. The church, some of our sermons now, even some of what appear in the both newspapers, I'm worried when they write these things. I don't see any connection with the Jamaican people and what is going on in Jamaica. It's not, they're in our papers. And these are priests who have PhDs are writing. What has happened to the connection of the church with the human being in the Caribbean and in Jamaica? You're quite right.
Well,
I don't see it.
But how do you think we can reconnect that gap? Because if, as you said, those who write and have that reach through media, which then gets a commentary as such as what we are doing now, how do we now move to those steps then, Father Gordon? Yes, you said there's synod in the Anglican Church, but what about the church leadership collectively? Where is there the room to drill this down and hold it?
Well, they're supposed to be meeting soon. But when I looked at St. Mary's Church, and I told the new clergy who's coming, you've got to connect to what's going on around you. If not, you don't have any church. So, from the lane and the gully bank, the church now has to not only walk sometimes. Where are the Jamal classes in our church halls that we used to have? They don't have it again. It's the churches sometimes who taught young people that they could enter university from the Jamal class. I know it happened at St. Mary's Church.
Okay.
We had the largest scout troop in the Caribbean, 350. That's where we have to go. We also had periods, once per month, where we had classes in homes. So I told them to go back to it. Where we had 12 classes discussing what you said a while ago.
Okay.
Right through the church in Duane Park.
However,
That's what I did.
Father Gordon, we thank you so much for this conversation this morning. We've come to the close of our discussion on the role of the church in the national economy, especially against the background of the IMF. We thank you. And we are joined for a discussion this morning with Mrs. Imega Breeze McNabb, Executive Director of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association. Good morning, Mrs. McNabb.
Good morning, Sharon, Andre.
Good morning, Mrs. Matnab.
And we have also Mr. Robert Chung, Director of Occupational Health and Safety in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Mr. Chung.
Good morning.
Morning,
and
how are you
good
doing?
morning to listeners.
Yes, as I have you as the last person introduced, I'm just going to jump straight in your chest. Let me just say that. If I might sound abusive with that, because I'm going straight. Come on,
I don't mind aggressive women.
All right. No. Assertive, honey, assertive. I'm just telling you where I'm going. All right, let me tell you the challenge I have. I sat in Parliament some time ago where we started the discussion about occupational health and safety.
Yes, that's correct.
So I put in you on notice that I want us to discuss that further as to why we haven't gotten to the. I know you are not policy, yes, but there has to be something that has been stopping us moving this piece of legislation, and how this ties back even with this issue of stigma and discrimination that we're dealing with in the food service industry.
Okay, first of all, the legislative process has been very long and tortuous. I guess some legislations, as they impact on people, especially in the workplace, and it has to do with the world of work and how it might impact on work in the sense that people might feel threatened, managers might feel threatened, workers might feel that they're not getting the adequate protection and so on. And the government has to balance all of this. We have to protect, we have to provide the right amount of protection for workers. And at the same time, it must be in an environment where managers are able to provide the kind of protection that is of a standard recognized internationally so that we are competitive and that our trading partners will accept the level of occupational safety and health that we are providing in Jamaica. The other end of the tube in that is that while we are here languishing with this law, everything else is moving along. I mean, we are fighting now to implement occupational safety and health laws in Jamaica, and the rest of the world has now gone on to occupational safety, health, and well-being.
Thank you.
Which is another level completely.
Exactly.
So we are always behind the eight ball, and even now I'm hearing some people saying we have to be careful how we put this in. And and I think that what we need to do is to implement it, have a period of moratorium in which we sought to get things, collaborate on it and to see where we can put in the right mix and all of that. But while we are waiting to get the right thing and to put it in place, we are causing a lot of, impact out here in Jamaica, and it's putting us way behind. We are no longer competitive with the rest of the world in terms of where we are in treating our workforce.
A large part, too, of occupational health and safety is the whole issue of HIV/AIDS in the workplace. And I just want to read a bit of preamble from the policy here that says HIV/AIDS is a workplace phenomenon, not only because it has the potential to affect labor and productivity, but also because the workplace has a vital role to play in the wider struggles to limit the spread and effects of the epidemic. The workplace is an appropriate setting to involve the working age population in efforts to prevent and control the spread of HIV/AIDS through education and training, counseling, care, and support. Mrs. McNabb, from an employer perspective, what the policy has been asking is for employers to allow for this sort of take-up in terms of training employees and providing the support services for employees with HIV service. But isn't the time taken to deal with this issue taking away from productivity in terms of the time that workers should be at work and actually doing the task assigned to them?
Well, that's why we have to manage the process, because if we don't do anything about it, it is going to continue to impact productivity. From the last figures I've seen, at least 70% of persons infected are within the age group of 20 to 49. Am I correct in saying that, Robert?
That is correct.
Right.
So this is the most productive segment of the workforce.
So you can't ignore it.
As was said in the policy, we play a vital role as a manufacturing sector to also aid in prevention and making sure that we follow the ILO principles of non-discrimination, the gender part of it, and ensure that we offer care and support when we do find that persons do have HIV or AIDS in the workplace.
So how are we dealing with this issue of stigma and discrimination in the food service industry? Just in raising this in conversation in amongst friends or groups that you sit down having a talk with, people have an initial rejection to this because they just don't want to consider that someone who is carrying this virus, this disease, could possibly be serving them. And one point I had to make to them, Mrs. McNabb, because I've done a lot of work with my HIV support group in St. Catherine. Many of the people that we see everywhere, tellers in our banks, police personnel, persons serving us gas, persons at a cash register in a supermarket. These are people, normal looking people who have this disease and carry on with their life. How different should it be, the consideration of working with someone like that in the food service industry?
Well, this is one of the myths that we're trying to dispel because we, as you said, we think that, if you have HIV/AIDS and you prepare my food, then I'm going to automatically catch HIV/AIDS as well. Right. So this is a part of the project that we're now implementing in partnership with the Ministry of Labor, which is actually the HIV proclamation for the food industry pilot project. So it has to do with not only the employer side of it, but increasing the awareness of the Jamaican population and dispelling some of those myths that you don't catch HIV/AIDS through someone who has it and preparing your food. So that's why we welcome this project and signed on immediately. And I want to say that the work has not just begun here because from 2009, the GMA was a part of the workplace, HIV/AIDS workplace program where we actually, in some of our companies, assisted and provided them with technical assistance to develop HIV/AIDS workplace policies.
Mr. Chung, sorry about Andre. Just quickly, just to pick up back on that point, Mrs. McNabb was referring to this special project. You want to give us some more detail about this special project?
Yeah, so what it is about is that the potential of the twin sister of AIDS, which is stigma and discrimination, to close down a business once it is even suspected that one worker has HIV and AIDS. So in the food industry, it is particularly sensitive because people believe that HIV/AIDS can be passed on if you get a cut in the kitchen and it's gone on the food and so on and so forth, which is one of the myths that we're trying to debunk. That this is not so. HIV/AIDS cannot be passed on in that way. Plus, this is also saying that we ensure that the preparation of food in these industries that we are working with are of the highest hygienic standards. So not only HIV and AIDS is prevented, but the pass on of any other foodborne illnesses is also prevented because of the high standards of food preparation that we are promoting in this particular proclamation. So the proclamation is saying that HIV/AIDS, we recognize that HIV/AIDS, can't be passed on in this way, and this is so because of empirical evidence that we have, and not only that, but that these industries practice the highest standard of hygiene, and so therefore we ensure that the food that you're getting is therefore free from any passing on any kind of foodborne illnesses, and in particular that you are at no threat for HIV and AIDS. And this is aimed at the public, for the public to understand that persons with HIV and AIDS are not a threat to them, even if they work in the food preparation industry, and in particular so because I know of incidents as working in Ministry of Labor that persons have been reported or even suspected to have HIV and AIDS, and they are fired. And when we try to intervene from the Ministry of Labor, the people tell you, the owners tell you straight blank, listen, I can't keep this man, I'm a business being closed down because the public perceives so and so. So the proclamation is aimed at getting an input from the public and from the workers together that we can debunk all of these myths about HIV and AIDS and to protect those persons who are infected and affected by HIV and AIDS from the stigma and discrimination, and of course to protect their employment and to help them to live through what is really a very deadly disease.
Well, but Mr. Chung, it's all well and good to have policy and declaration and documents, but I'm not particularly sure as to how exactly the implementation is going to work. Is it that you go into workplaces and try to identify those workers with HIV? How exactly does this process work?
No, nothing like that. All the proclamation is saying is that we are aware of HIV and AIDS and its impact on persons and so on and so forth. But what it is doing is really engaging the public into understanding that the disease cannot be passed on through preparation of food. Getting them to be aware that HIV and AIDS is not something that they must fear these people, that they may scorn persons who have HIV and AIDS are infected or affected by HIV and AIDS, that they need to work and they need to understand that these people are engaged in their profession. And I think because some of them are highly professional people, we're talking about chefs, we're talking about cooks, we're talking about persons who serve you, professionals in this industry who may be infected or affected by HIV and AIDS. And the fact that they have been serving you for years and you did not contract the disease, but the moment you think that they have contracted it or have it, that's the time you're going to say, well, I don't want it to serve me and so on and so forth. And in fact, some persons have been affected by HIV and AIDS for a very long time before even they themselves discovered it. And they have been living with their families, living with their co-workers, living in the general public, doing all kind of things. And it has never been passed on in that casual kind of way. We know the part that it is true sex that it is transmitting, and of course, blood transfusion, but not if you get a cut and the person touches you and you touch the person. That's not how it is passed on. It's not passed on in that way because the virus cannot live out of the body longer than 5 seconds. So it cannot be passed on in that way. So we need to engage the public in that kind of knowledge so that they are aware that this is not a threat to them.
Mrs. McNabb, we're up on a break, but before we go to the break, just take this question for your consideration when we return. How should an employer deal with a worker who has HIV? Having discovered that the person has HIV, how should an employer deal with that?
We continue now with the big picture, and we're speaking with Mrs. Imega Breeze McNabb, Executive Director of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, and Mr. Robert Chung, Director of Occupational Health and Safety in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Mrs. McNabb, Andre had put something for you to chew on before we took the break. You want to pick up back on that? If we can just let's just remind the listeners, though, of the question that had been put to you.
Right, so the question was, how should an employer deal with a worker who has HIV/AIDS?
All right. I would like to refer back to the ILO principles here, because if an employer discovers that an employee has HIV/AIDS, we would refer back to treating this matter as confidential. So you don't want to have this person being disclosed to everyone, their status. Then continuation of employment. This is not a reason to have fire someone, because, as I said, we're dispelling the myth that if you have HIV, you are less productive or you're going to transmit this disease. through food preparation or any other means. We're also talking about care and support and counseling. We have to ensure that we provide that like we would do for persons with any other disease. If we found out that someone had cancer or any other form of illness that requires care and support and counseling. So these are some of the 3 out of the 10 principles that we would say to employers when you find out that someone has HIV that you would refer to in dealing with that situation.
But this means that there's additional budgeting that any employer is going to have to do to be able to provide these coping mechanisms, because there's additional training for your HR and counseling staff. And if there is your medical plan, aren't these all factors that you have to consider, Mrs. McNabb?
Yes, these are things we have to consider, but as I said before, we consider this for any other type of illness. So why single out HIV/AIDS as being any different? We train our staff daily on various issues having to do with productivity. If we realize how serious HIV/AIDS can impact the productive segment of our workforce, then this should be incorporated in any training program that we're having for staff. If we're dealing with healthcare, likewise, this should be incorporated and should not be singled out as any health issue that is different or would be of an additional cost.
Can I ask you though, is there, just as a follow-up on this public education and monitoring and counseling, if someone breaks, this confidentiality, let's just say for some reason, we don't know how, Kevin finds out that I am HIV positive and whispers it to Andre here beside me, who whispers it back to Crystal, who whispers it back to Sherry. So it's now within the organization. We can track it back that it was Kevin it started from. What kind of sanctions are there? How is that approach within the workplace, this breach of confidentiality?
Yeah, I think that's one.
Okay, yes, Mr. Chung, sure, please.
Definitely, because under the Occupational Safety and Health Law, then the HIV/AIDS workplace policy is intended to become a regulation, and under the regulations, the sanctions and penalties under the Occupational Safety and Health Law will apply to breaches of the regulation. So if you look right now, the advertisements that are coming on the media, especially on the television about the workplace policy, those are the tenets that will be in the HIV and AIDS regulations, and of course it speaks about the type of sanctions that are liable under that law. So that would apply to if somebody breaches any of those regulations, and of course the breach of confidentiality will be one of those that will be sanctioned and penalties apply.
But what kind of sanction? What kind of penalty, though, Mr. Chung?
Well,
I know it's not in place. I know it's not in place yet, but I know how this thing works. You look at what's being done elsewhere, UK, Canada. What kind of sanctions?
We're talking about sanctions that can range from anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000, depending on where they are going to place the sanction on this particular breach, because there are several breaches inside here, and the breaches in the occupational safety, the penalties in the occupational safety and health at that kind of range, up to $500,000 which is $500,000 for the organization, and anywhere between $250,000 up to $400,000 for individuals who breach sections of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Therefore, that would apply to the HIV and AIDS breaches that falls under that act.
So, Mr. Chung, seeing here on your website that you also have a HIV/AIDS unit within your department at the ministry. Is that unit responsible for the implementation of the policy?
Yes, that unit is responsible for the implementation of the policy. We run programs like the Voluntary Compliance Program, which sets up the organization, gives the organization an opportunity to satisfy all the requirements of the workplace policy. And you will be provided with technical assistance and the necessary advice and consultation from the Ministry of Labor to assist you to get to that level. And, as it implies, voluntary compliance means that the organization wants to comply with the law without being coerced into doing so. And so we set up a mechanism for which any organization can apply to the Ministry of Labor for being a part of the voluntary compliance program. And we bring them on the program first with a baseline assessment to see what it is that you have in your organization that will help you to comply, what you need to comply with these regulations and so on.
Mrs. McNabb, what has been the response of the GMA to this initiative, other than the special project that Mr. Chung is speaking of, but just generally in terms of workplace compliance? What have you found as a response from your membership?
Well, we find that our membership has been asking why the lengthy delay in the passing of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So I don't think we're adverse to having such a policy. As a JME, we encourage our members to comply, and we actually have to sensitize them to what will be in this legislation and the terms, and as you said, the breaches and what they would have to pay out in terms of fines if they do breach. So it's about letting them be aware of what is within this policy, what is to come, and for them to comply. A part of this project, as I want to refer back to the project, though, is to improve the voluntary compliance with the occupational health department's work. So that's another aspect of this. And I want to say, as we speak now, we actually have a sensitization workshop that is on at the JMA with 15 companies within the food industry and representatives from the ILO and the Ministry of Labor who will be going through these HIV workplace policy and sensitizing them to some of the issues.
One more follow-up on that to the Omega. Tell me, we have had discussions, for example, with the Scientific Research Council and Bureau of Standards about activities which they are taking on to meet the phytosanitary measures in respect of agro-production and so on. Is there any kind of declaration that has to be made by someone handling food for export, be it either organic food as in live food, as against prepared food, that there are standards that have been met in respect of occupational health and safety, particularly for the HIV grouping?
Well, I'm not sure as it relates to HIV specifically, but yes, there are standards and regulations that we have to meet. There are local standards, as simple as having food handlers permit, as simple as good manufacturing practices, how your factory has to be laid out in terms of hygiene and so forth. As you're aware, manufacturers also implement management systems such as quality, environment, and health. And I figure that under these management systems, there are aspects that have to deal with the health and safety of your workforce, which should incorporate having persons with HIV/AIDS.
But Mr. Chung, a larger part of the employer pushback against the HIV workers in the workplace is that especially in the food service industry, is that there's this whole idea of food safety, which is very critical, and there's also this issue of the low barrier to entry into the food services industry, and with the public health at risk. Don't you think that this is a reasonable concern for employers, even though we understand that HIV is not spread by handling of food? It is still a reasonable concern for employers to have.
Well, if you don't understand the issue, you would have that. And I think that largely the Jamaican public is not aware of the true, do not have the information on HIV/AIDS in a sense that would allow them to understand the the issues that are involved in HIV and AIDS. And so you find that fear is existing, and out of that fear comes stigma and discrimination. So in our proclamation, we say two things. We not only say that it is not spread, we also say that the important thing, which is that the highest standards of hygienic, the food is prepared under the highest standard of hygienic conditions, so that we ensure that the food that you get is of the best quality. So we're not only saying that the HIV/AIDS cannot be passed on in that way. We're also saying that we are taking precautions, also the necessary precautions under the highest standards of hygienic preparation. So we are doing two things in that. We are ensuring them that it can be passed on through HIV/AIDS can be passed on through food preparation, and two, that we are in fact taking precaution against any other foodborne illnesses, including HIV and AIDS. If you still believe that it can be passed on in that way, well, we still are preparing food in a way that even if it can be, it won't be.
Okay. Well, we thank you both for this conversation this morning. We hope that our listeners are better served having been exposed to this information. Mrs. Emega Breeze McNabb, Executive Director of the GMA, and Mr. Robert Chung, Director of Occupation, Health and Safety in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Thank you for sharing with us this morning.
It was a pleasure. Yeah.
Okay, we look forward to that legislation finally coming off the parliamentary tables, looking at occupation, health and safety, and particularly because, as Mrs. McNabb has said, if the members of the